Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got a couple of things to discuss, including a couple of signings and 3 significant trades to discuss, with all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now, I'll kick things off with a couple of recent signings that have happened. Just a couple of signings, and they're not too significant, but there is one significant one. We'll get to that one last. We'll start here with the first signing that happened, and that is that the Buffalo Sabres have extended Jeremy Davies, who is a left shot defenseman, to a 1-year contract extension that will have an average annual value of $775,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next year. Now, for Davies, he was picked up last offseason after playing with the Predators organization for the past number of years. He did pretty well 2 years ago with the Preds, putting up 6 goals, 31 points in 54 AHL games, and also adding 2 assists in 6 NHL games. He was able to get more of an opportunity at the AHL level, with the Sabres having a little bit of a weaker defense at the AHL level. Was able to get into 66 games, but only put up 11 goals and 23 points, so wasn't overly productive. He also got into 1 NHL game with the Sabres and didn't do overly bad, so I think Davies is a good depth defenseman. Most likely will not play on the Sabres defense unless they run into a lot of injuries again. I think that defense is stacked at the NHL level. It's a little bit weaker at the AHL level, so I can see why they would bring him back. And once again, the Sabres don't have the best of defensive depth at this point in time. So going out there, bringing back Davies on a cheap 1-year deal is a pretty good move in my opinion. It once again gives them some more depth for next year, and I think that's a pretty smart move for the Buffalo Sabres. So in my eyes, Davies bringing back on a cheap 1-year deal to be a good AHL forward and a depth call-up if they run into injuries, I think is a pretty smart move for the Sabres, and I really do like that signing for both Buffalo and Davies. As for the other signing to discuss here, the Arizona Coyotes were able to sign goaltender Conor Ingram to a 3-year contract extension that will have an average annual value of $1.95 million, and the deal will begin at the start of next year. Now, for Ingram, he's a solid goaltender. He was playing with the Nashville Predators for his entire career up until last season. He actually been doing pretty good. 2 years ago, which was his last year in Nashville, he put up a 2.70 goals against average and a .915 save percentage in 54 games, and also did quite well at the NHL level, getting into 3 NHL games and putting up a 3.71 goals against average and 893 save percentage. But he also did fantastic in the playoff games he played with Nashville due to Saros' injury. So once again, he was a solid goaltender both at the AHL and NHL level. The Preds didn't have a spot for him last year due to them having Lankinen as their backup, so they ran with Saros Lankinen. They placed Ingram on waivers to open the season, and he was claimed off of waivers by the Arizona Coyotes, and Arizona used him as their backup for this past year, and he did fantastic. He got into 27 NHL games and put up some solid numbers, getting a 3.37 goals against average and a 907 save percentage. So definitely, Ingram looked really good. There were some questions about whether the Arizona would even qualify Ingram, given the fact that he was arbitration eligible, but I think this is a pretty good deal for both sides. So for Ingram, he's going to be the backup for the Arizona Coyotes for the next 3 years, and he's going to probably do pretty good, making just under $2 million. As for the Arizona Coyotes, they definitely needed some more cap to bump themselves up to the cap floor, so I don't think they were overly worried about extending Ingram on this contract, and I think as a backup goaltender, he just looks really good. So I think this is a pretty good move for both sides, and I really do like the signing of Ingram in Arizona. So pretty good move for both sides. Next, we go over to the trade rumor part of the video. So there's definitely been a lot of trade rumors. As we know, draft day is tomorrow. Once again, I'll be doing my live video at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, so definitely don't forget to check in on that at 4 o'clock tomorrow Pacific time. But with the draft coming up right now, free agency not too far away, I'll also be doing a live video on free agency day as well, so stay tuned for that one as well. But with all these big dates so close, there's a lot of trade discussions right now, and we've also seen a couple of significant trades. Now, we'll get to the first 2 that happened last night. I never got around to making a video for this, so I'll put them in this one here. And they both involved the Boston Bruins. So I'll get to the big one first. The Boston Bruins have shipped Taylor Hall plus Nick Foligno to the Chicago Blackhawks in exchange for Ian Mitchell and Alec Regula. Now for the Hawks, they're going to get some pretty good players here. Now Foligno is a pending UFA. At this point in time, I'm not sure if he does extend or hit the free agent market. It's really hard to say. It's quite possible that with them having his negotiation rights now, they do wind up signing him, but I'm not sure it's a guarantee. So definitely wouldn't say it's a guarantee Foligno stays in Chicago, but it is a possibility. But the big piece for the Hawks here is Hall. Hall is an amazing top six winger. It was more of a middle six winger on the Bruins, given the fact they have so much good depth on that forward group. His first full year, 2 years ago in Boston, he did fantastic. He hit, I'm pretty sure, like 60 points. He was a really good fit there. But this year, he didn't do overly good. He only got 36 points in 60 games, was injured for a significant period of time this year. And then with Boston, they acquired Tyler Bertuzzi at the trade line, and he fit in much better with that team than Hall did. Hall does fit in well with the Bruins, but Bertuzzi's style of game just fits and complements the Boston Bruins phenomenally. So if they were going to go and make a run at Bertuzzi and try and bring him back, they were going to need to move some significant money out of their books, and that is Taylor Hall. So Hall is a solid NHL winger, and I think they brought Hall in because of Bedard. Now the Hawks will most likely be drafting Connor Bedard first overall tomorrow. It's most likely a given he'll be drafted. So given the fact that the Hawks don't have very much NHL talent or NHL high-level talent that they could play with Bedard, there was a lot of speculation that they will try and get some players who they could use with Bedard. I think Hall's a perfect fit for him. Hall's a really good playmaker, so he could definitely help Bedard and improve his gameplay throughout his first season. Also, Hall knows what it means to be a first overall pick. I mean, he was one back a number of years ago. So Hall can definitely give his own experience with Bedard and help him to become a better player, and I think that could be a really good fit there. So not only do I think getting Hall surrounds Bedard with NHL level talents and could definitely help Bedard produce really, really well in his first NHL season, but I also think the experience of Hall being a first overall pick as well will definitely help Bedard mature really well. So definitely, I think this is a really good move for the Hawks. They have an amazing amount of cap space, so getting a $6 million haul for the next 2 years is not overly bad. And if they're still rebuilding in a year or two when Hall's entering the final year of his deal, then they could possibly move him at like next year's offseason or a trade deadline for a decent package if he can continue to bump up his production. So definitely, I think this is a really good move for the Hawks. It helps them now with Bedard, and I think getting a Bedard, a solid winger like that, is going to help them now, but it also could help them in the future getting more assets if they decide to trade him in the next year or two. So definitely, it's a solid move for the Blackhawks. For the Bruins, it's a cap dump basically. So both Mitchell and Regula are decent prospect defensemen. They're both currently RFAs, so it'll be interesting to see if the Bruins wind up qualifying them as RFAs or if they will let them go to free agency. Mitchell has actually spent some time under Jim Montgomery in the college system, so Montgomery does know Mitchell pretty well, and some of Mitchell's better college seasons came during that time, so I think Mitchell could definitely be a solid third pair defenseman still. Probably still needs some more work, but I think Mitchell could definitely still be a third pair defenseman. It will be pretty difficult to challenge for a spot given the depth that the Bruins have, but I definitely think Mitchell could definitely still be a solid third pair defenseman. Now, Regula was originally a Detroit Red Wings draft pick. He was traded to the Chicago Blackhawks in a minor deal, and he's actually been doing pretty well. He's gone into a handful of NHL games, put up an assist if I'm correct, so he definitely does have some NHL experience. Though he's definitely done extremely well at the AHL level, putting up back-to-back 20-point seasons these past 2 years. So I definitely think Regula could also be a good third-pair defenseman. So not a guarantee either of them a third-pair defenseman. With the depth on the Bruins side, they could both easily be AHL defensemen this year for the Bruins. But I think this is a smart move for the Bruins, as it clears them cap space so they can go after Bertuzzi, and it gives them a couple more options on the defensive end. So in my opinion, this is a pretty good deal for both sides. I would say the Hawks are the winners in this deal, just given the fact they're able to get Hall, who I think could definitely make Bedard a better player. And if they can sign Foligno, he could be a good middle six forward in Chicago. For the Bruins, they do get a couple of decent players in Mitchell and Regula who won't be too expensive to sign. And on top of that, they're both pretty good defensive prospects who I think could eventually be solid NHL's third pair players. And on top of that, the Bruins also get some cap space with moving the Hall contract to go after a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi. So in my opinion, it's a pretty good win for both sides, but just given the fact that the Hawks are able to get Hall, who's going to help Bedard a lot in year one, I think that makes it a win for the Chicago Blackhawks. The second trade I want to discuss also involves the Bruins. It's a minor deal, so not too much to get to here, but the Boston Bruins sent Shane Bowers signing rights, who, as Bowers is an RFA, to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for Riley Walsh, who was another defensive prospect. Now, both these prospects were 2017 draft picks. Bowers was a late first rounder, Walsh was a third rounder. And at this point in time, both have not been able to get into the NHL on a consistent basis. For Bowers, he was a 2017 first-round pick of the Colorado Avalanche. He's definitely been developing for quite a while now. He even got into his first NHL game this past year, got injured, was sent back to the minors, has been mostly a minor league forward his entire career. He was dealt at the deadline to Boston in exchange for Keith Kincaid, so he's been with the Boston Bruins since the deadline. He's done all right during his time in Boston's AHL affiliate. But once again, the Bruins also have a pretty deep team too. So getting him to Jersey, I think he still has some potential as possibly being an NHL forward, maybe being like a fourth line center in my opinion. But for right now, he's probably still a minor league forward. So getting some depth on the forward group, I think, is a pretty good deal for New Jersey. And Riley Walsh is most likely not going to make the NHL team in Jersey this year, and he's waivers eligible this year. So they were never going to keep him. They were most likely going to lose him on waivers, and they at least get a decent prospect in Bowers in return. So, like I said, I think Bowers could still be like a fourth-line center, but still probably needs some development time as he still hasn't been able to crack the NHL roster yet. As for Boston, this is their third young defenseman they got on the day, joining Mitchell and Regula. Walsh, like I said, he's a solid third-pair defenseman. Has actually been putting up some pretty good numbers in the AHL these past couple of years, but he hasn't been able to really establish himself as a solid NHL forward yet. I think he's gotten to one NHL game that he played this year, but he hasn't been able to get into a consistent NHL roster spot at this point in time for the Devils. So with him being waivers eligible and the Devils having a pretty deep defense, I could see why they would move him to get a guy like Shane Bowers. With the Bruins, I could definitely see Walsh being a solid third pair defenseman for the Boston Bruins. Like Mitchell, like Regula, I think he does have some NHL potential, maybe a little bit more given the fact he's a little bit more mature than the other two. And he does have, I think, a tad bit more NHL potential. So this is a pretty good deal, just a prospect swap. I do think Bowers could eventually be a fourth-line center. I do think Walsh could eventually be a third-pair defenseman. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me at all if both of these guys wound up in the minors to start the season. But it also wouldn't surprise me at all if Walsh was able to carve himself out like a third-pair role for the Bruins. So definitely, good moves for Boston and Jersey. This moves by Boston does lead me to believe that the Bruins may be considering moving out some of their defensemen. They have three now solid D prospects to add to their already growing prospect pool. So being able to move a guy like Grzelcyk or Forbort, who have 1 or 2 years left on their deal at $3 million, to free up some more cap space when they have a couple guys like Walsh, Mitchell, and Regula who could step in at a third pair role and do pretty well, I think makes this a little bit more flexible for the Bruins. So definitely, I would not be too surprised if in the next couple of days we saw the Bruins move at least one, if not two, NHL defensemen now that they have a couple of decent young NHL players in Walsh, Mitchell, and Regula. And then the bigger trade that happened just recently, a little bit earlier today, was that the Kevin Hayes deal finally went through, but it was a tiny bit of what it could have been before. Now, as we know, we talked about this in yesterday's video, the Blues and the Flyers were talking about a trade, sending Hayes and Sanheim plus possible other pieces to the Blues in exchange for Krug, a first-round pick, most likely the 25th overall pick, and possibly other things as well. And it never went through because Torrey Krug was not willing to waive his no-trade clause. So it seems like that big possible 3, 4, 5, 6 player deal that could have a few draft picks involved is completely gone at this point in time due to Krug not willing to waive his no-trade clause. But this is a pretty decent deal for both teams. Hayes, at 50% of his salary retained, so at a $3.5 million cap hit for the next 3 years, was traded to the St. Louis Blues in exchange for a 2024 sixth-round pick. Now, for the Flyers, it's not overly ideal to retain so much money on his contract. Retaining just over $3.5 million for the next 3 years, using up one of the retained salary slots for 3 years on Hayes is not overly ideal. But I do think it was the cost to move Hayes. Hayes is a pretty good, but I don't think he was producing anywhere near his $7 million contract. So I do think they had to retain some of his contract, but I was expecting more of like 5, maybe 4.5 million, not completely a 50% salary retained. But it is what it is, and the Flyers are able to get him off the books. Hayes is a decent forward. He hit 50 points for the second time in his career this year, but he didn't really fit well under Tortorella, and there was a lot of speculation that he did not want to play with Tortorella next year. So it definitely was a move that the Flyers really had to make, and they get a draft pick in return. So it's a 2024 6th-round pick from the Blues. It's not really an overly great draft pick, so it'll be a 6th-round pick in next year's draft, and it just adds to the Flyers draft capital. So not an overly great return for Hayes, and given the fact they had to retain 50% of his salary, it wasn't fantastic, but at least they were able to get the Hayes contract off the books. For St. Louis, it sounded like Hayes was the main guy they wanted from Philadelphia in the original trade. It definitely sounds like they view Hayes pretty well. I know they lost Ryan O'Reilly in a trade right before the trade line this past year, so I think Hayes could definitely step into the role that O'Reilly did. He's not as good of a defensive forward as O'Reilly is, but he's still a solid second-line center. I think in St. Louis, with a couple of good players, he could possibly put up like 40, 50, maybe even 60 points with them over the next 3 years of his contract. So definitely, I think this is a really good move. Gives the Blues a veteran center. $3.5 million for Hayes is not overly bad, given the fact he just put up 50 points. And I think in time, maybe he could definitely put up even 60 points with the St. Louis Blues as like their second-line center. For the Flyers, they need to get rid of Hayes. He was just not working well with Tortorella, and I think even though they had to retain 50% of his salary, which was over $3.5 million, and they only garnered a 24 6th-round pick in return, it was a move they had to make. And even though they couldn't do something bigger, thanks to Torrey Krug not moving his no-trade clause, I think this is still a pretty decent deal from Philadelphia. But to get Hayes at $3.5 million, I think is a pretty big steal for the St. Louis Blues to only give up a 6th-round pick, and I think the Blues will be the winners, in my opinion, on this deal. But definitely, let me know down in the comments. What do you think about the two signings that I mentioned earlier? What do you think about the Hall deal? Does the Hawks win this deal due to the fact that they'll be having Hall with Bedard next year? Or do the Bruins win this deal given the fact they've cleared up some cap space? And on top of that, the Bruins-Devils prospect swap, which prospect do you think is better? Is it Bowers or is it Walsh? And do the St. Louis Blues win this deal, getting Hayes, who's a solid second-line center, at just over $3.5 million? Or do the Flyers win this deal, getting a 6th-round pick for moving on from Kevin Hayes? Definitely let me know down in the comments what you think. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. So remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, trade analysis, stuff like that, so definitely check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific time or 7 p.m. Eastern time for my live draft coverage that I'll be having on my channel, so definitely don't forget to check that out. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.